Right, I'm unwrapping the prism from where I've had it carefully wrapped up, and I'll inspect it. Yeah, that's got the mildew on the screen, so that is worth pulling apart and cleaning. Now I did mention these fibres. Tiny fibres, looks like hair, but it's finer than hair by a long shot. They're fibres coming from that black coating, whatever it is, some asphaltum based product. God only knows what that stuff is, probably bloody blue asbestos or something, but whatever it is, I'm taking it outside and wiping that off. Right, all that stuff's gone. Now, taking this apart. So we've got the bottom plastic spacer and that brass shim. There's a piece of foam here. It's as hard as a rock. It once filled up this gap over at this side. I've got two screws here, small black screws, are holding this plate in place. This aluminium clamp here. The clamp in turn holds the prism to the top of the finder assembly. I've taken the prism off complete with clamp and all. Looking at the state of the prism, it's pretty good. The silvering has certainly it's got a slightly cloudy look to it. Not bad. It's not a bad example by any means. Certainly I wouldn't expect to see a problem through the finder like that. Okay, so I'd like to separate this bracket from the prism because I want to get this tape off around here. There are 4 rubber pads between the foil that's glued to the prism and the bracket here. Unfortunately, the little rubber pads are stuck well to both sides. Now one's just shifted and it has moved away from the foil on the prism. If you force something like this, what tends to happen is that the foil might peel off the prism along with half the silvering. So you have to be very gentle and hope for the best. That's just come loose. It's free in 3 of the 4 places, 4 of the 4 places. So the rubber pads are stuck to our bracket. You can see the marks where they were stuck to that. Now this tape around the prism, that needs to come off. The tape's job is to keep dust out of the prism assembly. Okay. Yeah, that prism does have a bit of a cloudy look to it. I'll certainly be considering that And before I pop that back on the finder, the silvering's complete. It's not as though it's peeling off in great patches, but the silvering has a slightly clouded appearance to it. Okay, let's just continue taking this apart. We've got one more black screw here, holds this mask at the back. We've got tape around here covering the holes in the case. Now we can start disassembling the optical components here. So there's 1, 2 or 3 springs in this position, holds the condenser and lens in the top. We'll just unclip those springs. And how many have we got today? One's just fallen out. Let's find that in a second. There's one. One flew past me and went for the floor, I think. Yes. 2. We have a condenser lens, a spacer, another condenser lens, a mask. Now we come to the delicate components. Here's our ground glass focusing screen. Now that ground glass focusing screen, the matte side there goes downwards, and I can see, tilting this to the light, that matte side has definitely got tiny mildew spots on it. And looking here, this is the plastic component at the base of this finder assembly. This has the moulded split image in it for the rangefinder split image, and I can see mildew spots all over the inside surface there. There are 6 tiny screws, 1 at each end and 2 on the long sides, that hold that plastic piece in position and actually set the position for that plastic piece. So you can adjust the position slightly. You can move it from left to right or from front to back, and that's used to make sure that the little split image in the middle of the screen falls in the middle of the ground glass, the hole in the ground glass there. Right, that component's fallen out. You've got to be very careful with that. That's possibly the most delicate part of the whole camera. The surface of that, the plastic surface of that stuff is very, very easily scratched. I don't touch that with anything. I hold that in a clamp and clean it in the ultrasonic cleaner. I don't wipe it. That's either surface of that plastic with anything. I'm just backing these screws up 1 full turn, so I'll be able to get that plastic piece back in place when I reassemble this. These screws are very small. Like very small things everywhere, they're exceptionally easy to lose. Right, I'm going to pop some of these components aside. The condenser lenses are glass, they're quite robust, easy to clean, shouldn't have a problem with those. The ground glass screen is again not easily damaged, not accidentally. Just make sure I've got all of the little screws and brackets in one place. Now there's my plastic lens. I've got a clip to put that in. I'll do that now. I've got this clip, this bulldog type clip that's I've dealt to the spring in it, so it's lost most of its tension. It's ideal for holding a component like that so that I can put that in the ultrasonic cleaner without having to touch it, and that should go nicely when I get to that stage. But my first task is to get rid of this gummy stuff here. This is from the adhesive from the tape, and there's a bit of tape still on here. I've got to get rid of all of that, and acetone is just the stuff for that. Acetone, of course, will eat plastic components for breakfast, so you have to be very careful with this and not splash it about, and particularly not splash it about anywhere near that plastic viewfinder component, otherwise it'll be ruined. The bulk of this adhesive comes off fairly easily, but you can spend a fair bit of time trying to get the dissolved adhesive out of the crevices and areas that you can't easily access. And the main reason I'm getting rid of it now is that adhesive is dried up over time, and there's nothing surer than it'll just come away as powdery deposits and find its way onto the optical surfaces in the finder if I don't make an effort to make sure I've got rid of it all. As I've said, it's exceptionally difficult to reassemble these finder components without introducing some new dust particle to annoy you. There's just too many large glass or plastic surfaces, all of which are viewed at high magnification through the viewfinder. So it's just a wee bit through it. As I say, if there's not a serious problem, leave well enough alone. Even here, where I'm stripping this down to see the back of the mildew spots on the focusing screen, of course none of that would have any cause any problems with the recorded image at the film plane. All it is an annoyance in the viewfinder. Dealing with the tape residue on the prism itself is more of a nuisance. Often I'll just leave it there untouched, because if I start wiping at that with some acetone, I will probably end up stripping the black paint and potentially the silver underneath it off the prism, which would be undesirable. Here the cotton buds are tending to catch on those 6 tiny screws. I've got to be very careful to avoid that, otherwise you end up with tiny threads of cotton stuck in there. Those screws have been locked in with a touch of lacquer, and as a result they'll They're very good at hanging on to threads of cotton. As for the tape, when I put this back together, I use duct tape, black duct tape, the stuff with a cloth base. I found that works quite well. I don't use electrical tape. PVC electrical tape stretches and shifts, and as it stretches, you know, it's inevitably going to return to the rest position again, and it'll peel off. But the duct tape with the cloth backing in it, that tends to be fairly stable, and that tends to work well. Of course, I'm being very careful to make sure there's no adhesive left on this bottom edge, because if I reassemble this and put it down on a clean tissue or something and then pick it up again, I don't want to transfer anything sticky from the frame to that plastic component. Anything on the surface of that plastic component, that's going to be there to stay and be very, very obvious. It's right at the focus point of the magnified image in the finder. Right, that part's clean. I will get rid of all this mess. Start with a fresh paper towel to work on and start reassembling all of this. Well, as you can see, I've got the viewfinder assembly housing sitting loose in a stray reflex body, and it's just so it's a handy place to put it while I'm assembling things. So I've cleaned the components, and starting with the plastic component with the split image component on it, and I've cleaned that in an ultrasonic cleaner, so I haven't had to touch it at all. And now I've got to put that in place. Now the prism side goes up here, so I'm checking which way round I've got this, and I can tell by where the screws bit into it for adjustment purposes. They're at the front. It's there and there. So I know it fits in right there. So I'm just checking that's dropped all the way down. This is held in place with 6 tiny screws which locate it. I'm putting the ground glass screen in place on top of that. That goes ground glass side down. And there's a couple of formed spring tabs, if you like, on the housing, which will keep that in place. And looking down, I can see that the window there is miles away from the middle of the hole in the ground glass. I would say that that's not looking exceptionally promising. It's looking like the window is miles away from where it needs to be. I'm going to pop that ground glass out and pop it in the other way round, on the off chance that that's not exactly symmetrical. That's the front, that's the right way up. Oops, don't want to be dropping it. That's better. There's ground glass. It's Just check that there's no dust in here. That still looks very asymmetrical to me. Swap that over. I can't say that looks any different really. We'll carry on and we'll assemble it and see what happens. So where's my next piece? Well, the next piece that goes in here is a rectangular metal mask or baffle, and on top of that there is a plano convex condenser lens that goes flat side down. On top of that we have this mask. This supports both of these condensers, and it only goes in one way up, otherwise you'll find that it rocks on the condenser if you put it round the wrong way, like that. Here we have our other condenser. Now that uncharacteristically dropped into place correctly. Normally you have to fart around quite a bit with that, pulling it in and putting it back until you can get it to sit in flush and square. Our retainer clips. In this particular example there were two. Some cameras will have one, some cameras will have two, and some even have three. Now that's not sitting down flush for some reason, that's better. Alright, so I've got my components together in there now, and what I've got to want to do is make sure, see if I can get that split image prism in the middle of the hole in the ground glass. I'm looking at it now and it's all off to one side, so I'll just remove this from here because it's done its job. It's supported this while I've been assembling the finder. You can do all this of course without a body to do it, and that's just a handy jig. And here I'll need to make some adjustments. So I want to push my prism this way, so I'll wind in the screw at this end. It shifted quite dramatically at that point. There's obviously lots of play with that. I'll get it back the other way, get it centered. I need to move it over this way slightly. If the prism isn't in the middle of the hole in the ground glass, that's not really going to affect anything in a serious way. It just looks a bit disconcerting when you look through the finder. It needs to go down this way. A bit more. It's looking more hopeful. You can just judge this by eye. There's no need to measure it. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Right, and I'll just check that all of the screws are snugged up. And that's done. So I've got my prism centered there in the hole in the ground glass. So that'll look fine in the finder. So that part I've dealt with. And basically that's all I need to do to that part at the moment until I assemble the prism and everything onto it. I want to put some tape over these ports to stop any dust entry, but again that's not a critical thing at this point. Right, I better get the prism assembly ready. I'll have the body here now, and I'll get these pieces in place. The prism sits into that recess there, and the prism is held in place with this clamp, and the clamp is held in place with two long screws to the body, which I'll put in first. If I can get everything lined up. One on the opposite side. Two small black screws which hold the clamp in place when the big screws are removed from the body. Let's see if I can get them. Getting this one started is a bit of an act. That's better. And the object here is to get the prism assembled as a unit so that I can get the tape in place that I'll be using to seal it against dust ingress. So basically at this stage I just want to check everything. I'll remove that prism and then get my tape in, or remove the clamp and get my tape in. Right, well I will check that with a lens on the front and see how that behaves.